Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Illinois Green Party series. Your host tonight, Calvin. David is out for the week, but he'll be coming back next week. And we have our guest on tonight, Martese Chism. She is a nurse activist and is going to be talking about organizing for Medicare for all. That's going to be the gist of it. But Martese, can you walk us through your history and how you got started with this movement?
Yes. Thank you for inviting me.
You're
Uh,
most welcome.
how I got in this movement, I'm a registered nurse. I've been a registered nurse for 29 years. Uh, and I believe in unions because my family, they were all union members.
Hmm.
But how I got into the movement is because my great grandmother, she was a civil rights activist, and she marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965 for voting rights. So, and I was 4 years old, so I was raised in the movement. And 10 months after she marched across that bridge for voting rights, she went to a public hearing in Jackson, Mississippi, with four freedom fighters, one Jewish college student and three blacks. And they went to Jackson, Mississippi to give a testimony, their testimony on voter suppression and poverty. Uh, the public hearing was held by Senator Robert Kennedy. And so they gave their testimony about poverty and voter suppression. And then after, on their way back home, before she made it home, the Klans forced her car off the road, and she was murdered. And a 78-year-old teacher, they were both decapitated. So at her funeral, when I went to her funeral, I promised her that her death would not be in vain, because that weekend before she went to give that testimony, some activists came and told her, they said that it's a death threat on you, and if you don't want to go do the hearing, you don't have to. But I remember her pointing to me, and she said, "You see that little girl right there? I'm going for her." And so I promised her that her death wouldn't be in vain, so that's why I always vote. And then in 2004, I received a call from my grandmother, who was my great grandmother's daughter in law. And she was in the hospital. They had to rush her to the hospital. She had breast cancer. And she was laying in the bed. And when I got to the hospital, the first thing that she asked me was, when was Bush tax cuts going to become law? And I'm like, what? Like, you thinking about this? You laying in this hospital bed fighting for your life, and you worry about healthcare costs? So I started crying. Uh, and then she looked up and said, don't worry about me. I'll be all right. And then I started crying. And my grandmother was a Christian woman, and she always told me to pray. And you know how, when you come from a Christian family, they always, forcing church on you. So I never, prayed, never went to church with her. But that day, I prayed because this wasn't right. And I knew I was losing her. We was in Chicago. I moved to Chicago for her. And so it was nothing else for me to do in Chicago. It was no reason for me to stay here. And so I prayed to God. I said, okay, now I'm ready to do your will now. What do you want me to do? And then that's when I heard like this voice said, I want you to fight for health care for all. And that was 2004. And I've been, doing his will. So in 2004, right after she died, I called my union, California, Nurse Association, because when he said, I want you to fight for health care, I'm like, how am I going to fight for health care? And at that time, I was an introvert that stayed to myself, didn't know nobody, didn't hang out. And I'm like, how am I going to fight for health care and lead a movement? And that's when he said, I'm going to I'm going to help you build that movement. So I called California, and then I said, okay, then let me pray on this. As soon as I prayed and said, amen, I had my cell phone on me, and it rang. And it was California Nurses Association. and they had just voted to go national, and they called themselves National Nurses Organized Committee, and that was my answer. So I led a desert at my hospital and joined California Nurses Association because they were fighting for patient ratios, of course, and universal health care. Wow. And that was in 2004. And then in 2005, I went on a Southern tour for single payer in the South. I saw, how people were dying young in the South. And then in 2006, we went on a Medicare for All bus tour with Sicko, with Michael Moore, with NNU. And then in 2007, we did a tour of the president, the primaries, and we stopped by all the candidates. That's when Obama and all them, all the candidates to get them on board for, it was single payer back then. And then, I've just been with them ever since, fighting for single payer. And I remember when I first started going to meetings, the first meeting, single payer meeting I went to, I don't know if you heard of Quincy Young, Dr. Quincy Young.
No, I haven't. Tell us.
He was like one of the founders of, he's been pushing single payer for the longest. He was Dr. King's doctor when he was in Chicago. And I would go to meetings, single payer meetings. And I remember it would only be 6 of us. And I'm like, this is not going to work out. 6 of us. And then every year, we went from 6 to 12. And then it was still small until we hooked up with Bernie Sanders in 2016. And then when that was one of his platforms, single payer for healthcare, it looked like we just took off. And we've been taking off ever since.
Oh my gosh. What a beautiful personal story, personal connection to the movement. Thank you for sharing that. And I can see how that could inspire you to work towards this goal. What is the goal doing now? And is there a name to this movement, this organization that you're working with?
Okay. The movement is called Fight for Medicare for All. And I know a lot of people, since forced to vote, I know a lot of people think we haven't been doing anything. But we've been doing a lot. Yes, we lost that vote. They didn't force the vote, but the fight wasn't lost. We kept on working and building. So in June of this year, 2021, my union started a school, and it's called Medicare for All Leadership School. And the reason we started that school, because like I told you, I was from the civil rights movement. And in the South, my great-grandmother, we had freedom summer schools in Mississippi. And she was one of the coordinators, her home. SNCC, I don't know if you heard of Student Nonviolent Coordinator Committee, Stokely Carmichael. And so when they would bring the Freedom Riders to Mississippi, they would stay at my grandmother's house. Wow. And they trained the freedom fighters. They called themselves freedom fighters, and they trained the freedom fighters. They didn't just have them off as activists. They trained them and they put them in a freedom school. And they taught them how to register to vote. And they taught them, and they also, and not only did they teach them to register to vote, the freedom fighters educated the people on the creek, because we lived on the creek. Okay. And so I brought that to my union, because what I was seeing is, because I've been in this movement a long time, and what I was seeing is we have a lot of freedom fighters, but they don't have, no education. And I was like, we need to have a school to teach our activists, our freedom fighters, so that they could be better organized in the community. And so in June, no, it was March, we started our freedom school. And it was 40 students, and I graduated from the first class in June. And in that school, we taught the students how to tell their personal stories.
Mm-hmm.
We taught them the difference between a strategy and a tactic. And that tactic was when they started to force the votes.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of that force the vote group. I wanted to force the vote
Right.
because I felt it was once in a lifetime. And then when I took the class, I understood why some of the left didn't join that fight. I found out that force the vote, it wasn't going to happen
Mm-hmm.
because in order for Medicare to pass, it had to go through a bunch of committees. And I don't like grandstanding because freedom fighters we didn't grandstand when we went out there. We went out there to win
Mm-hmm.
because too many lives was at stake. And so that made me not be so angry with them over the force to vote. But in this class, this school, we're learning, how to organize because that's the only way we're going to get Medicare for all is great organizing because that's how you're going to beat the Democratic Party because that's how we beat them during the Civil Rights Movement. Because a lot of people probably think that we were fighting the Republican Party. We were not. It was the Democrat Party who was the Jim Crow. And we had to out-organize them. And we had to be trained to out-organize them to win voting rights and civil rights.
There it is. And you did it through community engagement. You got all the people who cared about this thing and then gave them a path to work together to achieve this goal. So one thing about the tactic of force the vote is that it was looking like it was something that even if that single tactic were to have been successful and Nancy forced a vote, well, one, it would have gotten stuck in committee. Let's say it made it to the ultimate floor, then we would have seen it lost. And it had really no viable chance. And the argument is that unlike times in the past, let's bring up, and we talked about this prior to the show. Oh, I wanted to mention to everybody real quick that there might be some noise in the background. That's just busy city life down there where you're at, and maybe some construction, right? So everybody don't worry about that. But back to the tactic, it wasn't viable at the time, and it didn't have a lot of strategy behind it. It didn't have a lot of people's movement behind it at the time. You needed to have probably layered multiple strategies. And unlike stuff in the past where the civil rights bills of the time were forced to the floor, they lost, and then they were forced to the floor again and they eventually won. In that first go, it had viability. It had more than one tactic. It had layers of tactic, and it already had a lot of people behind it. It just didn't quite make it. There wasn't enough to push it over that finish line. But they kept that movement going. After one viable chance, they kept it moving to the ultimate viable chance that eventually passed. Can you elaborate more on some strategy for us?
Right. Now, once I took the class and I understood what tactics, so like, Monday night quarterback. So what I have, I think the force the vote, if we would have said we're going to withhold our votes unless you sign on as a co-sponsor, I think that's what the tactic should have been, or the strategy was to force the vote, because we are going to have to force the vote, because eventually we're going to have to force the vote. Even when we get to 218, we're going to have to force the vote. But the tactic should have been, but what they should have went after was to get her to sign on as a co-chair. Because that wouldn't have cost her anything. Said we're going to withhold our vote unless you sign on as a co-chair. Because what the Medicare for All coalition, they did, they went after Hakeem Jeffries. He's the third person in line. They followed him all over the place. And that's how we got him to sign on as a co-sponsor. And then now in the Ohio district, Beatty, she's like the Black Caucus chair. We're going after her. And I think that's what forced the votes that's what they should have went out to say. We're going to force the vote. Tell Pelosi, if you don't sign on as a co-sponsor, we're going to withhold our support. And I think we could have got the squad. I know we could have got the squad on board for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So some leftists might be frustrated that we're bringing up force the vote again. And it's not a topic that every leftist loves to hear about, either because they're so disappointed or because they think it shouldn't have been something we went for in the first place. But looking back, we're seeing where the gaps were in our organizing. We're seeing maybe we should have gone for a slightly different tactic and gone to push her for just co-sponsoring rather than just the vote itself, because just getting the vote itself and making people say aye or nay to it, that by itself doesn't really spur on the movement. We've already got co-signers and not co-signers. We already know who's with us and who's not with us yet. So what we could have done is change that tactic, made Nancy Pelosi with us. And it's all in how you use these leverage points. And there's going to be other leverage points that come up again, but your organization is looking to the strategy. The overall strategy is to get a bunch of support, make a lot of people sign on as co-sponsors, get organized to the point where you can call on any community at a moment's notice to go do a collective action together. I think this is so cool. Can you tell me a little bit more about this school? How do you get involved with such a thing?
Well, we sent out a link we started a class this fall. So it's going to be a fall class and a spring class. And this fall class, we had 140 people, 160 people sign up for it.
Wow.
And but we only selected 40. So how you find out about these training schools, because it's going to be important, because eventually we are going to get to a vote, because the movement is not dying and the movement is not stopping. So how you find out about the classes is Fight for Medicare for All. We have a website called Fight for Medicare for All, and that's where you find out about all our events and the things that we're doing every month. Every month we're doing something. We're not just sitting at home, we're not just sitting at home just tweeting. We're doing something.
That's right.
But the reason I brought up the force to vote is because even though we lost the vote, it's still in the media, social media, like the fraud squad. That's all because of force to vote. But once you take this class,
I'm so sorry. Is there a device that's making a little bit of noise? Is it done? Yes. I'm hearing something in the background. Sounds like a alarm going off or a phone call, maybe.
Okay, I think it's stopped.
Okay. So sorry about that. Please go on. So yeah, there's on the social media websites now, Twitter, it's still going, Fraud Squad, and we're all there's many people disappointed from Force the Vote and how they didn't use that leverage point. Yeah. So where do you think we're at now, and how do we change that?
Well, like I said, the movement we're because I think when we had 118 votes now. We are targeting for Congress to bring it up to 120. Our goal is 218.
Okay.
But I don't think we'll be able to get to that 218 quickly. Eventually, we're going to have to force a vote on something. And so we need to figure out, how can we force this so we can spark our movement. We got to do something to spark the movement, because when King was leading the civil rights movement, he always kept a spark. My great mom, they always had a spark. You got to have a spark, because if you don't have a spark, the flame is going to die out. And we got to figure out what that next spark is. Besides, getting people to sign on as co-sponsors, we got to get something, because we want to spark the public, the people.
Yeah. So what happened with Force the Vote was a leverage point where we could, as a Democratic body, the Democratic Party, they could vote for Nancy Pelosi. She needs to have a majority in order to become Speaker of the House. So we could have withheld that. Now, had the squad and extended progressives, had they withheld their vote, there was no chance anyone else could win. There was no chance a Republican could be Speaker of the House and run the agenda and the floor schedule. So it was a completely safe leverage point to do. But they didn't ask for the right things, and they didn't ultimately force the vote. And it wouldn't have led to much for anything in terms of Medicare for all, but Nancy could have become a co-sponsor. We know that in retrospect now, but there's other leverage points, and I want to bring that up because right now there's actually a leverage point being used, and that's the past infrastructure bill.
Yeah.
They're withholding, the Progressive Caucus is withholding their vote to pass the infrastructure bill until and unless the reconciliation bill package is also passed. So they're saying to the bipartisan bill, hey, you guys all want to pass this. You worked really hard on this. So you want to go home and brag to your constituents that you passed this. Well, you can't until you pass through and we pass in the House the reconciliation bill that has a lot of great stuff included in it that the public truly needs. So that's another leverage point right there. You want something, we want something. So there's leverage points that come up in Congress. It's not all once in a lifetime opportunities. There's hope for another movement like that in the future. And I wanted to go into it just for our audience in case they didn't know what force the vote was or what is going on in Congress right now. So what do you think of that? There's hope, right?
Yeah, and I think this is an opportunity to force the vote, especially expanding Medicare. I know we want Medicare for all, expanding Medicare for 60 to 60. The reason the progressive movement, the reason Bernie lost his election, and the reason Nina Turner, the reason I think they're lost, because I know other people. The reason I believe that, well, not believe, know that both of the candidates lost because they lost the black vote. And if we, like if the squad could say we're going to withhold our votes on this infrastructure bill so that you can leave Medicare, expand Medicare and a pharmaceutical, that is going to spark more, black voters to start looking at the progressive movement and progressive candidates. Because in 2024, I don't want to go with Joe Biden. I want him to be challenged. And I know that we cannot win the black vote until we crack that firewall. So this is an opportunity for them to withhold their vote for the raise that lower the Medicare age for 60, because if that will wake up the baby boomers.
Right.
And because that's how John F. Kennedy won, and Robert Kennedy. They came to the South and they offered, the black people in poverty something, because they were all Republicans and they left and went to John Kennedy. And I think this is our John F. Kennedy moment. But the only problem is I don't know who the candidate will be in 2024. But this is the opportunity. Now we just got to find a candidate to be there, to accept this, to be there when this opportunity comes.
Right. So, and I wanted to highlight, you mentioned they're also fighting for pharmaceuticals. So that is the pharma part of the bill where Medicare can negotiate drug prices.
Right.
Oh, that'd be so big.
Yeah, because like I'm a nurse and I'm a case manager, and a lot of the seniors, the baby boomers, who is the lower base for the lower base for the Democratic Party, they're on fixed income. Medicare for all only covers like 40%, and that's A. And now they have to use their fixed income and their savings to pay for Medicare B. And so lowering the drug kind, one of the big issues, the reason they're going in medical debt is because of expensive medication. And this will wake up some people if they can get that through. And then too, even if we lose, they'll be able to point to Joe Manchin, like the Dixiecrat, because
Yeah.
that's what sparked our movement. We saw these Dixiecrats with white supremacy, and they'll be able to point to them. And then I think the black voters is going to hold the Democrat Party accountable for not holding Joe Manchin accountable, and they're not going to forget. So either we're going to win, that'll spark the movement for the progressive, or they're going to be angry, and that'll spark the movement for the progressives.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to come back to the community organizers, the people who will go throughout the community and engage with people, catch them up on how to do our collective actions, but also inform them about what's going on. Is there education like that where we're informing constituents, people in our community, who's supporting this and who's not? I guess you've already said that you've been phone banking and calling the number 3 in line. Are there more actions like that where you're contacting legislators and you're keeping tabs on who's on board and who isn't?
Well, right now it's just these 4 but during the summer we had a list of 40 targets. So now we narrowed it down. The Medicare for All, coalition has narrowed down to 4. But now for me personally, because I want to educate the community, I've started my own organization. I'm in the process of starting it. And it's called Good Trouble Matters.
Yes.
And with Good Trouble Matters, we're going to register voters. And not only are we going to register voters, we're going to educate them on the policies that we're fighting for. And also to educate them about neoliberalism too, because that's something that the Black community, I'm taking a debt class at Rutgers University, and I'm learning about debt, and I'm learning about neoliberalism too. I didn't know what that was. I thought it was just a word that the left was throwing around. And then in my classes, I'm learning about neoliberalism. It's just like it just sparks something in me and makes me want to fight even more. So if this knowledge is making me want to fight more, in my organization, Good Trouble Matters, want to start having Zoom classes and start educating them, about the filibuster and the organized and the debt. Because what people understand, that makes them want to fight more. And like with Black voters, knowledge, it fires them up. Because they're not getting it from the Democratic Party. Because when the Democratic Party, what they do is just talk to them about their kids. They never talk about policies. And they hungry. And plus they're upset that the Democrat hasn't pushed anything through. And they had control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. So we got some angry people out here. And I want to, educate them. And to tell them, teach them not to just keep going with corporate Democrat, but look at other candidates, give other candidates the opportunity.
Absolutely. So I was just making sure on this link because I want the good people to find it. I'll definitely be putting it in the description for the video. So if you're watching this not live or later on, I should have the descriptions down below. Check those out. But for now, I wanted to make sure, is it through the UE Union website?
No, it's National Nurses United. But
National Nurses United.
Right,
okay,
but it's Fight for Medicare.
National Nurses United. All right, I'll try to find that link for you folks and just mention it on the site. Okay, Okay. So nationalnursesunited.org, and they have a Medicare for All section. Right. And there should be, if I click through here, I should be able to find that exact link for the Fight for Medicare for All. Okay.
Did you find the link? Fight for Medicare for All?
I haven't found that exact link yet, but I'll try to just click a little bit while we're talking here. So you took this to your union. What's it been like in the nurses union? And you've been involved with organizing growing up as well. Did you see some similarities in the union with this type of organizing?
Yeah. I mean, what do you mean like similarities? With the civil rights movement?
Yeah.
I mean, with my union, I saw similarities because they were fighting for the people, and then they like to educate my union is big on education, and that's what I saw during the civil rights movement. I saw civil rights movement was big on education, and that's not what I'm seeing with the progressive movement. I don't see that, and yeah, that's one of the similarities to the education piece.
I see it. I see it. So you took this to your union. What was that process like, taking it to the union?
Just, I mean, when I said I took it to them, I would just tell them my vision.
Okay.
And then they research. Well, most of them were, a lot of them, the older staff, they was part of the movement.
Okay.
A lot of them worked with well, in California, they worked with the Black Panther Party.
Okay.
And a lot of our nurses worked in the Black Panther clinic. So this was right up their alley
Oh yeah.
to get back involved, in this teaching, because this is what they did when they were younger nurses. And they was excited about it because they wanted to teach the younger nurses, the new nurses, about the struggle, and that nurses, that we should not only fight for safe staffing at the bedside, but we should be fighting for the community, because that's what they did, the older nurses. So they were excited about it.
Absolutely. Okay, so they were already involved,
Right.
or knew about community-based organizing,
Yeah.
which is wonderful. Yeah, I've heard good things from the Black Panthers, how they would literally hold schools, so much like y'all are doing now. So
Right.
This is great. We're seeing the echoes of great organizing of the past come here to the future.
Right.
I wanted to.
What I was going to say, because some of our Cook County public health nurses, they work with Fred Hampton on the west side.
Oh dang! Okay,
they
there it
is. In
is.
the clinic. So, like I said, they were thrilled to That's why it was easy for me to get them on board, because they were already freedom fighters.
That's right. That's right. So I wanted to harken back. I love talking about labor. I'm sure people in worker cooperatives generally agree with this. I always bring up worker cooperatives on this show, but I guess thinking about worker cooperatives and unions in general, it was unions, the two U.S. socialist parties back during FDR, the one U.S. Communist Party, the CIO, AFL, other labor organizations. They were that pressure. They were that organized force that were contacting legislatures, that were leading protests. And that's where we pass, or how we pass the New Deal with Social Security in it, and labor relations, guaranteeing collective bargaining. And it took massive organizing. That was back when union membership was higher.
Right.
Lots of people were in these organizations, and I'm hoping to see that again, especially with this project at those levels. We want to be able to say there's a lot of us, and we can make a lot of stuff happen. And we demand this, because each of us coming to our legislators and into the process as individuals is not going to be as strong as all of us coming together at once in massive protests and in massive contacting. And at the time, those labor organizations threatened a general strike. And we talked about this a little bit before. That's not the direction that the organization is going into, but it just goes to show the power of collective action like that, of saying we're not going to stand for this, and we're going to interrupt your daily routine and whatever status quo projects you wanted to work on, and we're going to have this happen. I just love these stories and this personal connection. When you go to this school and they're taught about those personal stories, why are they taught to bring up personal stories and relate it that way?
When they teach us, the personal story is really what moves the movement. The people want to know, if you've been through the struggle, how am I going to get you to join the fight if you never, been in the fight or had to fight about anything? And that's what the personal story does. It connects them,
Right.
to the people that they're trying to move. And a lot of the activists that were accepted into this program, they had some moving, personal stories, like family members losing homes, over that. It's powerful, and
Yeah.
That was the person's story is what moves the movement.
Yeah. So that ties back to how you're learning about debt right now and how that
Right.
accumulates and the systems that work to lead us to having medical debt.
Yeah.
That's how you can communicate with the community and educate them, and then they'll know which direction to put energy into. Okay. Okay.
And then when you're telling your story, you'll be surprised of your audience, how many people have went through the same struggle that you went through, and they thought it was just them.
Right.
They thought that they were just a terrible person, and when they hear other people's going through what they have went through, it lets them know that they're not alone. And so the personal story kind of moves people towards you, because a lot of people are sitting at home thinking, I'm the only one going through this. I'm a terrible person. It's all, my fault, my fault, my fault. And it's not your fault. It's the system fault.
Yeah.
And when we all sit down and talk to each other, that's when we realize that it's not our fault. It's the system. And that we need to take on the system.
Right. That's right. And I was mentioning labor before. I wanted to bring it back to this point, but I couldn't remember it and I panicked. You mentioned earlier, as we were talking before the filming, that there is a labor organizing group that's behind Medicare for All, that's supporting Medicare for All.
Yeah, we have a labor and single payer coalition, and I think we've been meeting for the last maybe 7 years, and we will have a conference like 4 times a year. Of course, we didn't have any last year, but labor. That's how we built up our labor support through this coalition. And but it's not the top leader. The movement is always bottom up.
That's right.
But our union, with our union, it's top and bottom. We all on the same page for National Nurses United.
Yes.
And so it's the rank and file members that's going, into the facilities, talking to their members, because when we go into negotiation now, most of our negotiation is spent on healthcare costs.
Right.
And we're accepting our wages have been stagnated, lower, because we're trying to, the union is trying to keep the healthcare costs down. And so we're educating the members, like, if we fight for Medicare for All and get Medicare, insurance off the table, then we'll be able to fight for higher wages. And then when they retire, it will help their family more. So we've been educating, and that's how we got a lot of union members on board for education. For Medicare for All, because we've been educating them for like this last 7 years.
Oh my gosh, 7 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is what people didn't know about was actions like that.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot.
And
then I want to go back to a general strike.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about general strike, but the closest to a general strike that I could think about, because I'm from Memphis too, is when the Memphis streets and sanitation worker walked off the job. When the 2 sanitation workers, which were my neighbors, they were killed in the truck, and they walked off the job. And that's when King came to Memphis. And that's why King was assassinated, because 1,300 Black streets and sanitation workers walked off their job and shut the streets and sanitation department down.
Yep. Yeah, collective actions like that, especially when it involves the local economy, can be really impactful. There was a strong organized boycott against the city buses at one point in the civil rights movement, and that proved effective as well, because turns out the city relied heavily on those on the revenue generated by the city buses.
Right, like in Montgomery, the Montgomery bus boycott with Rosa Parks.
Yes.
They shut down the bus, right?
That's right. So I'm glad to hear that labor seems to already be getting on board, and that there's already been a lot of organizing through the rank and file ship members to make that known. Everyone in the rank and file knows that they're fighting for higher wages, and what's in the way is this employer-based healthcare. Do you know why we ever started doing employer-based healthcare?
Yeah, I did a research on healthcare reform, and the reason we started doing employee-based insurance is because the old unions back in those days when they was going that strike that you was talking about,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they use healthcare as a bargaining chip, to get people to join the union, and because before they had the employee base, they had to pay for their own. So the union used that. That was one of their benefits. It was a plus back then when
Yeah.
United Auto Workers, Steel Workers, and they didn't want to give that part up because when Harry Truman tried to pass universal health care, he went to the unions, and the unions didn't support him. Big labor,
Right.
because they wanted to. And back then, well, I'm 60 back, like at Cook County, when I started 29 years ago, my health care was free. So they were offering free health care. So people were signing up for the unions for free health care.
I see.
And then since neoliberals kicked in the 70s and really in the 90s since Clinton, we started losing that.
Right.
And if I haven't studied the numbers, but I think that, that's when the union started declining. Declining because, and then the non-union facilities were offering health care to keep the union from getting into those facilities.
Okay.
And so through negotiations, once they weakened the unions,
Yeah.
the insurance started going up, and it's not a bargaining chip anymore.
Yeah, what was once a bargaining chip became such a bloated system, so much red tape and paperwork, and so many I call them mafia middlemen, but
Yeah.
such a like unfair pricing system. There's no strong regulation on what can be charged. So now hospitals
Right.
are charging $500 for 2 pills of ibuprofen and other ridiculous fees. It soon became too much of a beast to still be a bargaining chip like it was.
Right.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So part of the education and reaching out to the community is having the community recognize that Medicare for all, in terms of your cost over the year, is going to be less than going through private insurance.
Right.
By far, most likely, because it's based off of a progressive system. I had the bill up earlier today and was actually reading it. That was pretty fun. You can go to congress.gov and look up any bill you want and read it. So I was reading Bernie Sanders' bill, and in there it broke down how the cost would be spread out and how it's progressive. The more income you make per year, the more your percentage going in to the program is. But for most people, I don't know I can't remember the numbers from reading it, but I want to say if you're making under 400K a year, you're going to be paying less or equal to what you've been paying with private insurance.
I think it's less because,
Okay.
but the reason is less because even with the private insurance, because I know people paying $400 a month premium,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't include the co-pays.
Yep.
And the out-of-pocket costs.
The deductible that you have to meet. Yep.
Right. So, and with Medicare for all, you won't have any of those costs. And then also, when you have to go into a long-term facility, if you have an access, because your income is too much for Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you have to go to a nursing home for skill, like rehab for skill, long-term antibiotic, or just go in a nursing home period because you can't take care of yourself, especially when you get older, you have to sell your wealth off. Mm-hmm. And with Medicare for all, you won't have to sell your property. You'll be able to leave it to your children, your grandchildren. Yeah. Like I said, medical debt is one of the reasons. The medical debt is one of the reasons that the Black wealth has diminished, because they are paying for the out-of-pocket costs on their credit cards, and then that creates a consumer debt. And then a lot of them had to take out second mortgage, especially when you retire, because most people pay their homes off before they retire. And when they retire, their medical bill is higher now because when you put a union facility, our insurance was free almost. But once we retire, we have to pay, like for me, if I want to retire, I got to pay $800 a month for Cobra. And
Wow.
and that's just Cobra.
Yeah.
And so if I had an illness, then I would have to pay for that. And so a lot of, people have to take second loans off on their homes, second mortgages, to pay off their debt. And then they end up losing the home and their wealth. So Medicare for All would, prevent that from happening too.
Yeah. And it'll help accumulate generational wealth. And then most communities won't be facing that struggle anymore.
And I didn't learn that until I started taking this debt class. And I think if, like, we on the Medicare for, trying to educate people, especially the baby boomers, because the baby boomers are the ones that's voting for the, Democrats. So if we start explaining that, that's why I said this is the moment for progressive. We just got to seize this moment, and the only way we can seize it is with education and educating the voters.
Yep. And then when corporatist Democrats and corporatist Republicans are the only ones running, and they're both anti-Medicare for all and would never even go for the public option. Well, that's definitely where this is the Illinois Green Party series. That's definitely where the Illinois Green Party can do its job and be the voice of reason and go in there and just win it and take that seat. Because there's no other worthy opponent running.
But I've heard voters even say, I don't want to give up my insurance. You pay $800 a month because I don't want to, because they thinking about, Medicare is for poor people only. But I think when we start talking to them about their wealth, make it personal for them, then they'll start be like, oh, okay, what you say about this Medicare for all?
Yeah.
Because long-term disability is included. It's not just the hospital. They be like,
add this too, because we're not just comparing your regular health insurance cost versus what projected Medicare for all costs would be, right? Because it's going to be free at the point of service, Medicare for all. But Medicare for all covers more than what your private health insurance covers right now. Not just in plain old health coverage. There's vision, which we all pay independently right now. Yeah. Dental, which we all pay independently right now. Hearing, so hearing aids, especially into older age when the ears are struggling, that is a very big cost. I've seen my grandmother shocked at the bills that she's received with those. So you add up all those costs, and now you compare that to Medicare for all, which covers all of it, and you see free at the point of service. That's a pretty good incentive to want and support Medicare for all, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. But the hardest part is getting to the people to explain that, because they're not running in the ass like that to explain to the voters.
Yeah. So as part of community organizing, going door to door and showing up at city hall meetings and at community events and talking to people about that?
Yeah, all of it is included, but really the door to door, the one-on-one conversation, because that's the biggest part, because that's what the civil rights movement did. When they ran a third party, I don't know if you heard of Fannie Lou Hamer. They had a third party, and it was called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and they had 70,000 Black people to vote. And that, in Mississippi for this party against the Democrat, because they went door to door to door to door. That's what my great grandmother was doing. That's on the picture. The 101 and going door to door. You can't get around it. Door to door are talking to people. It has to be done.
I see it. So to get more community organizers, we have that website. I haven't found it yet. I'm sorry, but I'll definitely put it in the description. We'll work on it. Maybe you've got it ready to pull up. I can mention real quick that door to door seems to be more and more effective. Howie Hawkins has mentioned it. I forget what he calls it. I'm going to have to put that in the description too, because I feel bad. But also Peter Schwartzman, our first guest on this show, he was able to win mayorship by doing door to door. He was using an app that was telling him
Oh yeah,
go to certain doors. He said, forget this app. It's not working well. I'm going to every single door because I need to talk to everybody.
Yes.
Mm.
That app is terrible. I done been on so many campaign trails with that app, and then you skipping doors. I'm like, what is going on? No wonder we are losing. You're skipping doors. That is the worst. Whoever invented invented, they making a lot of money, and then most of the time it's not even current. If you want to build an up to date list, you got to do the door to door. And I don't know why, progressive. Oh, we need our app. We need our app, and they just program. Oh, follow the list on this list. You can't even add new people. That's for the birds.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating. So let's say we've got some viewers that want to join a door to door campaign like that. Can they find a community organizer that's gone to the leadership school and then get clued in on some actions that they're trying to lead, they're trying to run?
Well, now I'm beginning to get some of the progressive candidates to understand that we need to door to door. And one of the candidates is Keena Collins. She's running against in the 7th district, and she's a Medicare for All supporter. So they want to get into the door to door, but they don't have the volunteers. So I will look up her campaign because we want to hit up the 7th district.
Yeah.
And we want to start door to door now before the election, before they start getting signatures. And then I think it's a candidate in Schaumburg. He's doing door to door. I forgot his name, but
you message me after this and I'll throw it in the description. That's the beauty of YouTube and Facebook. We can edit that later.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, I brought this up to Howie Hawkins, the idea of passing a Medicare for all on a state level. It's tricky because it's a state and people can cross borders in states, but I think it's still doable. What do you think of putting a lot of effort into getting a big state to pass it, whether it be Michigan that's got some movement going, or California, which is like the world's 5th or 7th largest economy? And the reason why I ask this is because I'm hoping that medical marijuana and recreational marijuana is going this path because so many states had passed it. Gay marriage seemed to go this route as well, where first it was a few states and then it kind of swept the nation, right? And well, that was a Supreme Court case, so I guess it's slightly different. But I'm imagining that when things pass at a local level, that gives it justification to pass at a larger level. Maine passed ranked choice voting, and they had ranked choice voting in a city first. And that's when they had it on the ballot and passed it for statewide. So it happened small, and then it became bigger. What do you think of such a move, trying to get a state version of Medicare for all to justify the national?
I think the state, because in California, they're trying to push a state. It's called
CalCare.
Yeah. And, I think that'll work. But I think over the last 15 years, we've had big strides, movement in the Medicare for all, the big movement too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. I think we might get the national Medicare for all first because we've been working on this for the longest. But CalCare is trying to, but they have a Democrat governor, keep blocking it.
Yeah, that's frustrating. So they're not a good type of Democrat, if there is such a thing. I'm sure there is, but they're definitely not the good kind. They're in the way.
Right.
Okay.
And I think maybe New York. Did I hear something about New York? But I know Cal, because we're pushing that. My union is backing that.
Right.
To push a single payer in California.
That would be big. That would be big. Yeah, and I like that you're looking eyes on the prize. You're like, we've already been doing some great work. We're making strides on the national push, and why stop? And I hope I didn't come across as saying, oh, stop what you're doing and push for the states.
No, but I'm saying I think they both will work. But I think because when you think about the civil rights movement, the way they were able to change laws at the federal level, it was at the state level.
Okay.
So if we can go for it,
Okay.
I mean, if we can't go for it because the civil rights movement, that was one of their strategies and tactics they did at the state level.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So we're coming up on the last 5 minutes of the scheduled show. We don't have to quit right at the hour, but I wanted to leave the floor. Is there anything that we haven't talked about, or any more of your personal story that you wanted to share?
What I want to share is for people to join, to look up the site Medicare, Fight for Medicare for All, so that you can see that we're not just sitting here, just waiting on Joe Biden or Congress to pass it, that we're out fighting. And to hook up with an organization, to fight for Medicare for all.
Yeah. Yeah. Follow the links below and get out there. Be ready to do some tabling. Tabling helps organizations for the big part. Oh, and we got notes from the director here. So Peter Schwartzman's mayor of Galesburg. And then we, the Green Party and the Illinois Coalition for Medicare for All, we're trying to push it statewide as well. I've got a link, ilgp.org/township initiatives. We got one there pushing for some good work on the Medicare for All front.
Right. I mean, right, because we have the Illinois Single Payer Group. That's a good group. And the PNHP, that's another group with the physicians group. That's a good group. So all of those groups, we work together.
Yeah, and did you have anything else you wanted to tell us about Good Trouble Matters? I'm excited for this group. I like the fire in this group's name.
And the reason I came up with how I came, with Good Trouble Matters, it was after watching John Lewis' funeral, and he talked about good trouble, but I wanted to add matters to it because I wanted to take it further than he did, because good trouble matters good trouble means to take on the Republicans only. Good trouble matters is we're taking on the Democrats, because that's what we did in the civil rights movement. And I want to remind people, to remind our elders that our fight was with the Democrats. Yes, we're Democrats, but the only way you're going to get anything we want, Medicare for all, fight for 15, we're going to have to make them do it, because they're not going to do it. We're going to have to, I hate to say force the vote, but we're going to have to force them, because they're not just going to do it on their own.
That's right. That's right. FDR was a intelligent man in that sense, because during his campaign, he promised all these things. And at the end of his campaign, he's quoted as saying, now you've elected me, now make me do it. Make me do it. Right. And that was somebody who was on our side. So definitely we want to make people do it that aren't on our side yet. We want to pressure.
You remember Obama used to always say, if you want me to do it, you got to make me do it. But we didn't. And I think that's the Democrats. If you want them to do it, you got to make them do it, because they're not going to do it on their own.
That's right. That's right. And I'll take this moment to further that call for collective action. It's actually a great way to make friends, socialize, be part of a community, feel connected. I think we feel so alienated sometimes. We feel like we're islands, we're rugged individuals, as MLK mentioned, rather than being part of the community, being part of efforts with our neighbors. So I'm calling out to you, the audience right now. I'm looking right in the camera. Go out and join some of these movements events. Go out and table with friends. Go out and meet new people at a protest or at a letter writing campaign, especially once COVID is lifted, because you're going to make some friends and you're going to feel good in your soul, good in your heart. What do you say to that?
What I want to say too is start with your block. Organize, your community. Because once you get your community on board, then we can build, the next community. So find an organization too within your community, your block, and educate them. And because when in this election, we need to think of ourselves like a precinct. And like whatever candidate you support, you want to deliver your precinct. That's what they taught us during the civil rights movement too, the door to door. like I said, we used to live in the creek. Like we lived in Tallahatchie County. We had different counties, and everybody focus was on their county. That was in Mississippi, but now focus on your community, build your community, build your base from your friends. Like if you got 1,000 Facebook friends, come up with some questions, try to do one-to-ones with them, because that's what they teach us in that training school, to start off with your list and start having one-on-one conversation with your list, and then branch out.
I love that. And I love that spread of care for your neighbor. That's
Yeah.
a beautiful thing. Oh my goodness. Unless you have any last words, I think we might stop there.
Okay.
Martese Chism, nurse activist. She's part of groups of Fight for Medicare for All and the Medicare for All Leadership School. She's also soon to have Good Trouble Matters going. This was an absolutely lovely interview. Thank you so much. And we hope to hear from you again soon. Keep us updated.
All right. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. That wraps up the show tonight for the Illinois Green Party series. And as my co-host always says, make sure to be good and be green.
Thanks.